to consume so much of our production as would nullify this process of irreversible multiplication of falsified indebtedness into a terminal sum of indebtedness, which is the problem of the world today. For them to nullify that would require them to absorb so much as all the principal and interest to be paid on debts out of a circulation comprised at most of only some remaining principal, when the value of all the represented property only amounts to the principal. It's mathematically impossible for that to happen. It's a stupid, invalid argument. Yes, you can wax floors from the bank, but all of us can't wax floors for the bank enough to resolve all of the principal and interest that we are paying on these debts. Nor is it even the purpose of the banking system to allow us to do that by purchasing our production, because the whole purpose of the obfuscation of the currency is to dispossess us to a maximal extent possible. And they don't do that by purchasing our production directly. They do that by allowing us to service this escalation of falsified indebtedness until our production and means of production as well just fall to them in the end when we default on our debts, which is what's happening everywhere around you, which is why Darrell was pissed off. And Darrell was pissed off. He was right to be pissed off. I'm pissed off. You should all be pissed off. Every one of us should be pissed off. It's incredible that such a crime could be committed against the whole of humanity. And if we don't get pissed off, we're not going to do anything about it. If we're just sheep, moving along the side of the hillside until, the front of the herd falls off the cliff, and then those behind them fall off the cliff, and whatever, we suffer the fate of sheep. But we're men. We are creatures who determine our own fates if we want to. We don't have to suffer this. But what is our defense? What is our complaint? To simply pay our debts and to by resolving this falsified debt to the banks, leaving this obligation to pay and retire principal, an offense against all of us? If we all just could create money at whim, as this man is proposing, what would be the consequence? Money would have no value. You would have no idea that it had any value, because from the very beginning, just as the bank's obfuscation of our currency, there's no commitment to deliver value, which is the whole problem with money that this person would complain about. There has to be a commitment of value. I haven't got any questions over Skype, at least that I've caught up with yet, but I do have a couple of questions from the TNS chat room, and I'll address these now. One person asked, how would you handle the current debt burden imposed by the European Union and IMF upon Ireland? Well, as I provided in my prescription to the Reagan campaign in 1979, and have since had online in my article, If I Were President, the way that the debt is resolved is by contesting the falsified debt to the banking system. And so that's how it's resolved to the banking system, which would be the European Union and the IMF. But the rest of the question hasn't been asked, and that is, what about the necessary commitment to deliver value that money has to have for all of this to work in our commerce? In other words, if I issue a promissory obligation to someone who gives up a house, I need to deliver the value of the house, or the spendability of their income doesn't fulfill the need for reward for their production. So there's a further part of this question. So how would I resolve the part of the question that's been asked? That is, how would you handle the current debt imposed by the European Union or IMF? I would just issue an irredeemable promise to pay, as they have. I would write out on a piece of paper, "We'll pay to the bearer on demand to infinity," and I would sign that with my name, Mike Montagne. But that's not enough. Okay? That resolves the debt to the bank, at least by assertion, but without proof of the rectitude of that action, I have done nothing but cut off my nose to spite my face. Unless I can argue that the International Monetary Fund gave up, or the banks from which they acquire the currency, that in the creation of the currency no lawful consideration was given up, nor, even if it were, was it ever delivered to me in the process of creating money, which I assumed a purported, in fact, falsified debt from the respective banking system. Unless I can argue that, my act has no clout whatsoever. I should be laughed out of court because I would be a fool to simply think that I could write this out on a piece of paper without having any reason, much less having any conclusive, irrefutable reason that I should prevail in that fact. The truth of the matter is the banking systems of the world have defrauded us of a huge amount just in principle. But they've defrauded us, they've dispossessed us of many times that in interest. Those are their two crimes. So I'm asserting, when I offer this piece of paper up, that as a person I have a like right to do so, particularly under any ostensibly representative government. What can the banking system do? They can challenge me in a court of law, in which case they will have to prove that they gave up lawful consideration either, which they did not, which is why the Bank of England cannot answer to us. Therefore, the debt is resolved. The falsified debt is resolved. But a remaining issue exists, and that's the remaining part of this question which hasn't been asked. And that remaining issue is that an obligation to pay and retire the principal still exists. I have no right to that home for free. I have no right to the production of others for free. If I were granted that right, I could only be granted that right from them. Government can never give that to you because we're sovereign individuals. And each of us, even if it's only one of us, has a right to just reward for our production. And if I want to assert that I want a house for a house, that is my right. And no one can deny that to me, either by this obfuscation of the currency or by claiming that money itself is bad and we have to abandon the whole concept of money and become just righteous. Therefore, give me your house. Now, you can argue all you want against that, but the fact of the matter is, if ever I give up something without reward for it, and I want to say that's an offense against me, it is an offense against me, and I have a right to protect myself from that. And the only way to protect myself from that is by an accounting system which says, okay, here's something by which you can acquire the equal production of others, however you might even yourself determine that to be. I like that idea. That resolves my issues. I will take a promissory obligation which is enforceable. You see, because it and it alone is redeemable in the like production of others. So that's the answer to that question. Another person asked, Mike, after the recording, can you tell us more about the mandate for mathematically perfected economy? Yes, it's a huge document. It's larger than most of the constitutions of the world. It's a mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. And it is actually a set of irrefutable arguments for the sovereign rights of individuals, much as I have just explained even in answering the prior question, to protect themselves from injustice, which is something that Vincent has explained to me at length about the original concept of the sovereign Republic of Eyre. Now, these concepts are critical. You'll find that that men such as Thomas Jefferson and John Locke, many great minds have contemplated the possibilities of majorities imposing injustice on others. And so they were concerned, all of us have been concerned, with a rectification of law which somehow would protect even an individual, much less a minority, from any wrong whatsoever imposed by a majority. Now, there's some very difficult issues to contend with and to resolve in order to accomplish what is a vital purpose of protecting an individual. I mean, imagine that we just had no concept that rape was an offense against a woman, and all men just did this, you know, and there were more men than women, so we even passed a law making it legal. Well, we have no right to do that. We have no right to do that, because what's at issue here is whether anyone has the right to take from or affect a person against their will in any way that damages them whatsoever. Even the least of crimes is still a crime, is still an injustice, and is still a thing then which we need to resolve somehow. And so one thing that this mandate does is establish the sovereign rights of individuals. If you're the first woman to realize that rape is a crime against you, you have every authority under this amendment of law and government to establish that fact yourself and to claim it and to prevail in your claim. And one reason that we're doing this is, of course, a strategy that there are people who are apathetic. They don't think that it's important enough to get off the couch and maybe put their beer down or drink the beer down, you know, but listen to the explanation of our problems. Pay attention for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, just one time, so that you can understand that this banking system is a monumental crime against the world. That just in the last 20 years, you're paying 5 houses for 1 house. And that the cost of that house was multiplied for 40 years before that by this obfuscation of currency, which increased the cost of servicing debt, forcing everyone to increase the costs that they require to be returned to them for their production, merely in order to maintain margins of solubility. We talk about false bubbles. That's a crock. What's really going on is the